I've seen things you people could only imagine. Yeah, it's Blade Runner. We're going to talk about it today on Drew Reviews. All right, guys, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about a movie that's very near and dear to me. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. It's probably in my top 10. That is Blade Runner. I discovered this movie in about 2006. We'll talk more about that later. But this is one of those reviews I don't even have any notes prepared for because I've seen this movie so many times that it just feels like it's a part of my life. So we're going to get into it right now. Of course, it's released in 1982, directed by Ridley Scott. It stars Harrison Ford, Sean Young, Rutger Hauer, and some of the best performances they've ever given, especially Rutger Hauer in this thing. This movie's set in the future of 2019, and there's been who knows what going on in the world. It seems like all the major corporations are owned by the Japanese. You've got Harrison Ford, who is an ex-Blade Runner, and it doesn't really say what he's doing for work now. I'm assuming he's like a private investigator or something, but he gets called back to his old line of work by his former boss, played by M. Emmett Walsh, who's awesome as Brian in this thing. And apparently, there's three skin jobs or replicants who look like people who have jumped the ship off world, killed the crew, and came back. And we find out later they're there because they have a 4-year built-in lifespan, and they're trying to get to their creator so they can get more life, father, as Rutger Hauer says. And it's his job to hunt them down. Along the way, he runs into Tyrell, who owns the corporation. And Tyrell at his headquarters has his own personal replicant named Rachel. And so they have this test they do called the Voight Comp test. And Deckard has to do hundreds of questions on her before he figures out she is indeed a replicant. And over the course of the movie, as he's hunting down these replicants, he slowly falls in love with Rachel. And as odd as that sounds, and as the movie goes along, he's so desensitized based on what his previous occupation was. He's so emotionally unattached to everything in the world that he slowly begins to get a little bit more of that back. Um, it's really haunting, some of the, especially the scenes where he kills Zora. Just watching him get the shakes and everything, and dealing with killing these replicants off because I believe she was the first one. Along the way, he runs into the other replicants, Leon and Pris and Roy Batty, and there's a climactic fight on the roof, and we'll get into the ending of this movie later. But that's pretty much the synopsis for this movie. How this guy who's been so desensitized and so just weighed down by what he does in the world, how he regains his lust for life and a reason to live again. So I wanted to talk about the things that I liked first, and you can't watch this movie without appreciating the striking visuals, especially for 1982. The things that Ridley Scott did and the production team did on this movie, where there's the Hades landscape at the beginning of the movie. The miniatures of LA as they're going over the skyline and you see girls on the sides of buildings and everything. And it's all neon and in the rain. All that's been stolen by other shows, other movies, music videos. If you see that in something, that's because of Blade Runner and Ridley Scott's attention, his eye for detail. And it's funny that we're talking about his eye for detail because they ended up filming this, I believe it was on the back of one of the Warner Brothers sets. So, one of these old sets that have been there since like the 1950s that they dressed up all futuristic and in the rain and everything. And if you didn't know, you couldn't tell. The score here by Vangelis is just amazing. There's times here in my town where I just go out for walks and we'll walk several miles to that Vangelis score. It's haunting. It draws you in to that world that Ridley Scott created. This movie really is kind of an assault on the senses. You've got that visual style that Ridley helped create, and then you've got Vangelis with that score. It's two worlds colliding, and it makes for an amazing movie. The performances in this movie are great. You've got Harrison Ford, who's weighed down by the weight of the job that he has to do, and he plays this so solemnly, and it's almost haunting the way he plays it. Sean Young's pretty good here. Rutger Hauer in this movie is amazing. This is my all-time favorite performance of his, as it probably is anybody's. I mean, he's great in The Hitcher. He's really good in Split Second. I like both those movies. But here, he's playing this character who's come to Earth to seek more life from his creator. And, you could take what could be a vengeful character, but he's actually more poetic in a lot of ways, with a lot of his dialogue. That Tears in the Rain line at the end, which was mostly improvised, is just amazing. I like when he's talking with Sebastian, some of the things he says there. Daryl Hannah, who plays Pris, I like the playfulness in that character. You've got Leon in this movie, played by the late great Brian James, and his character it's played with this workmanlike almost stupidity to it, but the way he does it, you can't help but like it. But all of the performances in this movie are spot on. If you wanted to have an acting masterclass, watch Blade Runner. I think in one of the Alien quadrilogies, it had to have been for Aliens, the behind the scenes, Lance Henriksen said that the only time he'd ever seen robots done right was in this movie here. Now, before I rate Blade Runner, I want to talk about my experiences with the movie. Um, this is a top 10 of all time movie for me. Probably on the bottom half of that top 10, but top 10 nonetheless. I discovered this movie probably 2005 or 6 because of that Alien quadrilogy quote from Lance Henriksen. So I went on a search to find this DVD, which was pretty hard to find at the time. It hadn't been released since like the 1992 director's cut, and that was the version that I saw. And I have to admit, the first time I saw this was pretty late at night, so I was pretty tired. And by the time you have that final scene with Deckard and Roy on the roof of the Bradbury building, I was like, well, that was all right. I'm not sure what all that meant, but it was pretty good. And then a few months later, I watched it again, and it's like a light switch went off. The meaning behind this movie is you have this character who has become so detached from everything, from every emotion, from every feeling that he has because of what he's become, because of what his job has made him, so that this artificial life form, had more of a lust for life than he had himself, and it took his near-death experience to finally find that for himself and to appreciate life for what it was. And that second time, it hit me over the head like a hammer, and I'm like, yep, I'm in love with this movie. And it was a couple of years after that, like in 2007, when the final cut came out, which was Ridley Scott's definitive version of this film. And that was the version that I actually bought and brought home and fell in love with. I don't know how many times I watched Dangerous Days, the making of Blade Runner, because that's an amazing documentary. But when you watch something enough times, you start to accept it as fact. Ridley Scott had put that unicorn sequence into the final cut because he had always believed in his heart that Deckard was a replicant himself. And, that was taken away in the theatrical release of the movie because in that version of the movie, the producers of the movie felt like the test audiences weren't getting it. Like they didn't have any idea what was going on. So they put this dumbed down voiceover in the film to help explain things. And it pretty much blew away the fact that he had felt all along that Deckard was a replicant. So when he had full control over this version, he finally got to tell his story. And I kind of like both versions. I like that first version of the theatrical cut, which I didn't actually get to see until I bought this. This is the 5-disc set with 4 different versions. You've got the theatrical, the final, the director's, and the international cut, which I still have yet to watch. It's supposed to have more violence in a few of the scenes, but not too much difference, But so I finally got this, and I watched that theatrical version thinking I'm gonna hate that voiceover. It's just gonna be terrible. And you know what? I appreciated it. I liked it, and I actually liked them driving off into this green landscape, from outtakes of The Shining and everything. It didn't detract from the movie at all. So really, I like both versions, and I like the final cut version because it's kind of high def and everything. It's better to the senses. But I will tell you what I don't like, and that's that Ridley Scott tells me that the definitive version of Blade Runner is that Harrison Ford is a replicant. I think, much like Total Recall, which is another Philip K. Dick story, I think the question of is he or isn't he is completely awesome and fascinating. I think to answer that question is stupid. And all you'd have to say to refute that is, Harrison Ford's not a replicant. If he was a replicant, he would have superhuman strength like Leon. And they get into that fight, and Leon just whoops the crap out of him. And he would have been dead if it hadn't been for Rachel shooting Leon in the head. And if you go along with the Deckard as a replicant theory, it also lessens the impact of the end of the movie, where you're talking about Deckard finding his humanity, finding everything he lost by the end of the movie. If he's just an android, then all of that is for naught. It means nothing. Roy's speech means nothing. That moment they have there at the end of the movie in the rain means nothing. And I think to say definitively that Rick Deckard is a replicant is stupid. And although I like most everything Ridley Scott's done, I love Alien. It's probably a 10 out of 10 movie. We'll get to that with this here in just a little bit. I like Gladiator. There's been several other movies he's done that I've really liked, but to say that definitively, Ridley Scott, that's just stupid. So yeah, as far as which version um, I like the final cut, and I like the theatrical version. I think a version of both would be pretty cool. You can put that thought of that whole unicorn. When he picks up that origami unicorn from Graf at the end and looks at it in the final cut. Too bad she won't live, but then again, who does? And it fades to black. I mean, you could very easily see them in the next scene driving away, and that would be perfectly okay with me to have that version. So, to each his own. If you love one version over the other, I'm not going to hate you for it. Um, Everybody's got their own opinion and what they like, so that's mine. So I was fortunate enough to see this movie in Springfield, Missouri, at the Palace for like a midnight showing, probably back in 2013 or 14. It was great. I took my friend Jason, I took my son, I took my brother Brad. We all four just love this movie, and so we took it and got to see the final cut up on the big screen, and that was just amazing. When you see a high def version of a movie that you love, especially like that final cut, that's been upgraded so much up on the big screen, there's so much stuff that you miss seeing it at home, no matter how big your television set is. So, yeah, they play this all the time at like Alamo Drafthouse and stuff. Seek it out. Like if they're ever going to show Blade Runner, the final cut or the theatrical cut, go see it. In the history of Drew Reviews, there's only been two movies to get a 10 out of 10 rating, and that's Terminator 1 and Terminator 2. And that's mostly because the storytelling is so good, and the pacing, especially in that first Terminator movie, is just like so good that it just has to be a 10. Blade Runner, you would think would be a 10. I have to be in a certain almost melancholy type mood to watch it. So that does bring it down a little bit, even though I feel like it's probably a better made movie than Terminator 1 or 2. So I'm going to give Blade Runner a 9.5. I love this movie, guys. And if you haven't seen this and you're watching this, wow, what's wrong with you? Go find it. I'm sure it's streaming somewhere. I know they have the final cut at my Walmart all the time on like the $5 DVD aisle, so go check that out. And just one last note before we go. Of all the movies to come out in the year 1982, which 82 was a great year for film. You've got this, you've got The Thing, E.T., Poltergeist. The list just goes on and on. Fast Times at Ridgemont. This is my favorite movie of that year. It just barely beating out The Thing, which we'll talk about on this channel, I'm sure eventually. But yeah, this is definitely the top movie of '82 for me, and it's a shame that it was just critically panned and lauded by critics. And I hope you all feel really stupid for talking about how bad this movie was back in the day. So guys, thank you for watching this video. As always, be sure to like and subscribe and hit the bell if you feel like doing so. I'm Andrew, and I'll see you down the line.